They look all new. Are they new?
No, they're like dress.
If we could reconvene our meeting to open session, the board has been in executive session since 6 o'clock
Comfy.
to discuss 3 tenure recommendations, 2 personnel matters, and a legal matter. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Introductions.
Dave Hurst.
Catherine Nadeau.
Bob Fusion.
Hugh McKnight.
Jody Monroe. Holly Dellenbaugh. Meredith Moriarty.
John Walston.
Lauren Grasso.
John McPhillips.
And do we have any PIG or SUPA students here tonight? Welcome. Thanks for coming. You guys need to stay until the meeting is over or 9 o'clock, whichever one comes first. And before you leave, just make sure you come up and sign out. Looks like there's a sign out sheet on this side, there's one there, and there's one over there. That way you get credit for being here. First up is our approval of minutes. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the March 19th, 2025 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. 3, meeting reports. First is our superintendent's report.
Sure, thank you. On Monday, we held our first ever Community Outreach Day as part of our Superintendent's Conference Day. It was a great success, bringing staff together to support projects and causes that benefit our students, the town, and the broader community. There are photos from the day available on our Facebook page for anyone interested in seeing the impactful work. And I would like to extend a sincere thank you to our staff, not only for their time and effort during the day, but also for the planning and organization that took place in advance to make it all possible. So it's a great day, and the weather cooperated, thankfully. I'd like to recognize some of our students. We have 3 high school students who are enrolled in the CTE program at Cap Region BOCES, and they'll be headed to Syracuse later this month for the New York State Skills USA competition. Johanna Radcliffe is in the cosmetology program. Yusuf Al-Samarai is a network technology student, and Lolita Stark is a culinary arts student, culinary arts and hospitality student, and they will compete in the statewide tournament. Skills USA is a workforce development organization for students enrolled in career and technical education, and we wish them the best of luck. Also, I'd like to congratulate 6 of our middle school students who have been awarded the 2025 Capital Zone Sandra Morley Middle School Leadership Award. They are Julia Paz, Claire Engel, Addison Rexford, Ben Frick, Carter Martin, and Cameron Thomas. This award is presented to Capital Region Middle School students by the New York State Association for Health, Physical Education, and Recreation and Dance for achievement in leadership. So congratulations to those students. And I also wanted to provide an update regarding our universal pre-K program. We did put out an RFP, and we received 2 back that are interested in offering UPK for next year. We currently work with TSL, and they had 2 programs this year. We're in the process of evaluating the proposals, and we'll hopefully be able to increase this opportunity for more families next year. So I'll be able to provide an update to the board at our next meeting, also with information about the registration process for families. And that's all I have for my report.
Any questions or comments for Jody? Next is our board report. I had 2 things. One, I am looking forward to seeing Anything Goes this weekend at the high school. I think there are almost, 100 kids involved in it between the cast and the crew, and I'm sure it will be quite spectacular. And I was also made aware that there is an art show at the library in the month of April. I believe it is art from K through 12 students. So I just encourage board members to stop by and check it out if you have a chance. Anybody else have anything they wanted to? Ewan?
I wanted to echo and thank Jody and the whole district for the day of service. I thought it was really cool. I've heard back from several people in the community that they really appreciated seeing teachers and staff that work on that stuff. So nice job. I want to make sure the community knew in particular the giving closet is up and running, right? So, if you need clothes, if you need school supplies, if you need deodorant, whatever you might need just to help you have your best day at school, you can now get that here with no charge, no stress, just ask any teacher, any staff member, it's available to you.
Jody, do you know if they're taking ongoing donations to that?
I believe they
Yes,
are.
ma'am.
It's pretty well stocked currently, but I know that as the year goes on, they'll be taking collections similar to the backpack program.
The other thing, okay, go ahead.
Do you know, or how can folks participate in that or donate on an ongoing basis?
There is a flyer on the school website
Oh, perfect.
that will tell you details.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we have 3 students going to the state debate finals this weekend, which I know because I had to go spend the day judging it. And 2 of those are also going to the national finals in May. I want to give a particular shout out to senior Molly Willardis, who was a state champion and has really been inspiring to get other people now to get this program continued successful. So kudos to her.
Thank you. Next are student reports. Do we have anybody here from High School Student Senate? Anybody from the middle school? So we'll move on to our presentation this evening. Tonight we have our final review and decisions, our 2025-2026 budget presentation.
Good evening, all. This brings a close to the 25-26 budget development process. We'll go over a quick summary of where we started and how we got to where we're at tonight, along with some opportunities for the board to consider some resolutions later on in this evening's agenda. Ready to get to the next slide? This is a summary as of where we ended on March 19, 2025. There have been no subsequent changes between our last meeting and this meeting. We started at a baseline budget of $117.5 million in revenue and roughly $111.2 million in expenditures and $111.2 million in revenue, which started with an initial gap of roughly $6.3 million between expenditures and revenues. Over the course of various meetings, discussions internally with the board, as well as with departments and division heads throughout the district, we made a number of additions and deletions to ultimately get to an adjusted baseline of, on the expenditure side, roughly $116.6 million and $115.8 million on the revenue, bringing the new revised gap to roughly $820,000. That represents a current tax levy increase of 1.1%, which is right at the maximum allowable tax levy increase under the New York State's property tax cap law. A couple of significant changes, just I will highlight briefly. When we first started the budget process, the PSEG pilot was not included. Subsequent, over the course of meetings, the district was advised that roughly $3.5 million in unanticipated pilot revenue would be made available to the district. We also increased our state building aid by roughly $475,000 off of the most recent state aid run, and that was tied to our recently closed out capital projects. On the expenditure side, various ins and outs depending on the program area. I can highlight that there were roughly 17.5 FTE reductions across the various program areas, resulting in roughly a total of $1.4 million in reductions in both salary and fringe. That split is roughly $928,000 on salary and roughly $480,000 on the fringe side. But in order to balance the budget, I am proposing for the board's consideration the use of roughly $715,000 in the district's undesignated fund balance to bring things in line so that the tax increase is no more than the $820,000 shown. This is a summary of the budget expenditures by type, comparing not only the 24-25 adopted budget but where we started the budget back on February 26 and where we're at presently, you can see that last year's budget was roughly $114 million. The adjusted budget before you this evening is 116.6, based on those various categories. Large decrease in debt service associated with the capital project. We had refinanced and took some strategic decision-making on the allocation of debt associated with capital projects. A decent amount of increase on fringe benefits, specifically tied to hospital medical insurance and pharmaceutical insurance coverage. We're anticipating an increase on the medical side of roughly 11.5%, and on the pharmaceutical side, roughly 19 to 20%, which gets you a blended rate of about 14%. The other areas, the salaries show an increase based on collective bargaining increases, and our BOCES services and equipment supplies and contractual are relatively flat. Same information, just presented a little bit differently by function area and program area. Not much more to say other than there was a lot of hard work put in by department heads and district staff to bring you a budget of $116.6 million that minimized impact to local taxpayers. On the revenue side, the district is somewhat limited in terms of its available revenue streams or pots. The largest being school property taxes. That $73.9 million reflects the $820,000 increase spoken about earlier this evening. The pilot payments of 3.6 include the addition of the PSEG pilot. Had it not been for the PSEG pilot coming onto the district budget, pilot payments would have only been $163,000. State aid at roughly $34.6 million. That reflects a foundation aid increase of roughly $385,000, or a 2% increase, which was the hold harmless provision included in Governor Hochul's 25-26 executive budget. Other revenue is relatively flat and somewhat limited, and in order to balance the budget, again, you see the allocation or the appropriation of $715,000 in fund balance. A more definitive breakdown of state aid by function area. You'll see the foundation aid is increased to $19.6 million. When we had adopted the budget this time last year, additional state aid had flowed after that, which is why it's roughly a $600,000 year-to-year increase as opposed to the $385,000 increase I just mentioned. Slight increase in transportation aid, and building aid was increased as well by a significant amount. I will say that building aid was roughly around $3.8 million the prior year. The $5.8 million you see reflected in the 25-26 budget is associated with the closeout of our 2021 capital project. All of our forms and approvals and submissions have been submitted and accepted to and by SED, which has opened up the funding stream for building aid. We get roughly, depending on the building, 70-ish% reimbursement for those capital costs. So overall, budget to budget, you see roughly a $1.2 million increase in state aid, or 3.7%. I do want to note that the figures in the chart do not reflect the Bethlehem District's, Bethlehem Central School District's pre-K allocation of roughly $1.27 million. The district continues to struggle with inflation. I know I've mentioned this over the past several meetings, that over the past 4 years, inflation has compounded year over year for a total of a 21.2% increase. Under the tax cap law, the district can increase taxes no more than 2% in terms of its inflation factor, which only compounds to an 8.2% increase. So any difference in inflation had to be absorbed by the district through a number of ways, either maximizing existing or new revenue sources, minimizing expenditures, or finding new and strategic ways of doing more with less. That yellow shaded area in the graph really highlights the amount of year-to-year inflation that the district had to absorb internally. And in a lot of ways, we were able to do that with minimal impact to either operations or instructional programming. In 25-26, the maximum allowable tax levy is roughly $73.9 million. I am proposing that the board levy exactly that amount, which results in a year-to-year increase of $820,000, or a 1.12% increase. But I do want to highlight the past 2 years, between 23-24 and 24-25, the district could have taxed more than it actually did. So as an example, in 23-24, the tax levy increase could have been just over 3%. The approved tax levy increase was 2.3%, which left $543,000 in unused taxing authority on the books and in the pockets of residents and commercial entities in the district. The same thing for 24-25. Allowable tax levy increase of 4.2%. Actual levy was 3.25%, leaving $634,000 in taxable authority for a total of $1.2 million over the course of those 2 years. The tax levy ultimately drives what is known as the tax rate, and that's what homeowners and businesses in the towns of Bethlehem and New Scotland may be more used to seeing. That tax rate is influenced by a number of factors outside of the district's direct control. They're influenced not only by the assessed value in and between the towns, it's also impacted by the changes in equalization rates, and the district is somewhat limited in terms of forecasting not only the tax rates, but the changes in those tax rates given the layout of the real property tax calendar under state law. Equalization rates are made available throughout the state, usually around the tail end of February. The taxable status date, which is when any updates or changes or filing of exemptions must be made and submitted to any town assessor, is March 1st. The assessors then provide taxing jurisdictions with a preliminary assessment roll on or about May 1st. The final assessment roll isn't available until July 1st. So for a true year-to-year impact, not only for homeowners and businesses throughout the towns of Bethlehem and New Scotland that impact not only the district, but the district impacts those two towns, I'm not really able to forecast those until usually about mid-July. And we will have some subsequent meetings in the summer months that I'll be able to provide a little bit more information, and the board will actually adopt those tax rates. So as of right now, the only database that I have available and the database of record is truly the 2024 assessment roll. So for the town of Bethlehem, last year the equalization rate was 71%. The current equalization rate is 64%, which translates into the final tax rate you see, $22.27 for 2024, $22.57 for 2025, result in a 1.35% tax rate increase for the town of Bethlehem. For New Scotland, same arithmetic, actually results in a 1.6% tax rate decrease, and that's really tied because of the change in the equalization rates and the flip-flop between the towns for those 2 years. All in all, it results in an estimated, based on the information I have today, a $30 increase per $100,000 of assessed value for the town of Bethlehem, and a $37 decrease in the tax rate per decrease of $37 per $100,000 of assessed value for the town of New Scotland. When we get to the August meeting, I'll show us side by side, even though you're seeing increases and decreases between the towns. I promise you that Bethlehem and New Scotland residents are paying the right and correct amount of taxes, and it's all equalized when the formula gets put together. The following is a listing of the district's savings accounts, for lack of a better word. It highlights not only the fund balance, but various reserves. The district has discretion in the use and allocation of certain reserves, but not all. We have $780,000 in a workers' comp reserve, For employee benefits, roughly $3.3 million to be used to offset the value of the accruals for employees, a tax cert reserve of $500,000, a retirement reserve for our teachers and non-instructional staff of roughly $6 million, a 22 capital reserve of roughly $14.3 million, debt service of 1.6, and our undesignated fund balance of roughly $4.6 million for a total of roughly $31.5 million in various savings accounts for future planning for the district. Want to pay particular attention to the district's capital reserves. These are the dedicated savings accounts that the district funds to offset capital projects for the district. We had the 15 and 19 capital reserve with a funding limit of $10 million. We funded both those reserves up to those $10 million thresholds, but then subsequently used the funding for the 2021 capital project as well as the middle school auditorium project. The funding limit for those two reserves have been met. There's no additional funding in those reserves. The only existing funding reserve is the 2022 capital reserve, has a funding limit of $20 million. To date being June 30th, 2024, which was the close of our last fiscal year, there was roughly $17.2 million funded. The available funding, however, is roughly $14.3 million. It's a one-way valve on a capital reserve, meaning that you can only fund up to the $20 million. In this instance, if you take it out, you don't necessarily get to refund the amount you took out, which means that our funding limit currently available is only $2.7 million. I anticipate that as we close out our 24-25 fiscal year, particularly because not only the 21 capital project, but the middle school auditorium project, the costs were under budget, that those funds will roll back into those reserve dollars, limiting the flexibility I have to increase them further. To accommodate that, because I do anticipate that when we close out 24-25, we will have some additional funding, I'm suggesting that the board consider adopting a resolution for the voters to consider the creation and establishment of a 2025 capital reserve totaling $30 million. That is not an authorization to spend. It is just simply we are planning ahead. We are establishing another savings account at the branch. We're going to look to fund that over the course of the next several budget cycles and closeouts so that when the next capital project is developed and authorized by the voters, we have some savings account to use so we don't necessarily have to issue debt service. In terms of fund balance, under real property tax law, the district can have a fund balance that does not exceed 4% of its operating budget, which for June of 2025 will be roughly $4.7 million. I want to highlight that because when we get to a later slide, because that is really going to be used over the course of the next several budget years when we look at our future forecasting. Okay, so actually, Brittany, can you jump to the expenditure side first, please? All right, so on the appropriation side, the 25-26 numbers that are reflected in the chart are the ones that I presented earlier this evening. Roughly $116.6 million in total appropriation, broken up in the major categories. Forecasting out for the next 3 years, I had to make some assumptions in terms of where costs would be in those years, given what I know today. So for salaries, I assumed roughly a 3% year-to-year increase given the current status of collective bargaining agreements. Fringe benefits, which are somewhat tied to those salaries based on your Social Security and Medicare tax, as well as TRS and ERS retirement rates. I know that those numbers look high, and that's really, again, associated with the hospital and medical insurance lines for both medical insurance and pharmaceutical coverage, which are growing at a pace that far exceeds not only inflation, but given some of the increases in pharmaceuticals in general, are even outpacing the medical inflation index. Supplies and purchase services, roughly the same, given that we have some control over those. Debt service is tied to the existing debt issuances that the district has issued. They do go down somewhat over the course of the next several years. I did anticipate a slight increase in 28, 29, anticipating some future acquisitions of transportation vehicles in accordance with the vehicle replacement plan. Overall, you can see how the appropriation stacks up year over year. Next slide, please. For those visually, that learn better visually, this is a comparison of the major cost centers. Again, salaries and fringe benefits make a lion's share of the district expenditures, but you can see the slope up. You can roll back to the revenue, please. One more. As mentioned earlier, the district is somewhat limited in terms of its available pots of funding to offset the increases in appropriation. School taxes, I assumed that the taxes would increase no more than 2%. And in my forecasting, based on what I know today, our ins and outs, I do not really see the district having the ability to increase much above that 2%. It may go up a fraction or two, or down a fraction or two of percentage based on, debt service calculations and possible future pilots. But a safe bet is, under the tax cap law, a 2% increase in property taxes. Pilot payments, I'm anticipating that there will be a continuation or a new pilot agreement with PSEG. PSEG is in conversations with the Bethlehem IDA. I do not have any additional information at this point in time, but I do anticipate that sometime later in the fiscal year that will come into greater clarity. On the state aid side, roughly a 2% per year increase. That is arguably generous given there could be pullbacks in state aid given some of the pressures at the state in general as the federal decreases in funding come into better clarity. And all other revenue, again, not a whole lot of flexibility there. Gets you a need to balance the budget with fund balance and reserves. The 0.7 that you see in 25-26 is the $715,000 we discussed earlier. Again, that's a structural deficit in the budget. That structural deficit sort of compounds over the course of the next 3 years for 26-27, resulting in a $2.6 million use of fund balance. Again, once you get past that first year, things get a little shaky on your projections because things change very, very quickly. What I want to highlight, though, is when you start taking the first 3 years of that fund balance total, get you pretty close to the total available fund balance the district has now. So there will have to be some strategic discussions and conversations over the course of the next, over this year and future fiscal years. More importantly, I will be coming with to the board with an update in terms of where we are on not only expenditure trends on either a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on what the board's desire is, as well as where we stand on certain revenue streams. Because I want to make sure that our 26-27 budget process is open, transparent. You understand where things may need to be addressed. A lot of the budget process from the business office is about 10% in the budget development, and it's about 90% in the management of the budget as soon as it's adopted. So I do anticipate that some challenging decisions will have to be made over the course of the fiscal year. The other point I do want to highlight just briefly is in order to get not only to a 1% tax levy increase with a minimal use of fund balance and reserves, I really had to squeeze the budget. I had to really maximize other revenue sources, as limited as they may be. And I really, in cooperation, in conjunction with department heads and division heads, what could we decrease on the expenditure side? That being said, I went both ways, in opposite directions, which put some pressure on the management side of the budget. If the Fed funds rate, for example, decreases by a certain percentage, that's going to put pressure on my revenue estimate for interest and earnings. if utility costs come in higher because of tariffs or changes in the pricing index, that's going to put pressure on some expenditures, which is meaning that the whole budget's really open for negotiation over the course of the next couple of months to make sure that any area of expenditure and appropriation has its needs met that are in line with the revenue that we have received, that we anticipate receive, or conversely, the revenue that we will no longer receive for whatever reason. So I just want to highlight that whatever the board adopts today is just the starting point for the 25-26 fiscal year. I will do my best to provide as much information not only to the board but to the public in terms of where things stand as soon as I know it. Again, a visual image of where revenue stacks up. The pink line is the additional 2% increase in taxes, where the purple line represents the allocation of fund balance.
John, I don't mean to interrupt, but could you just go back to the slide before? Can you just explain to me, the top says 25, 26, 26, 27?
I'm sorry, that's a, it should be 27, 28, and 28, 29.
That's what I thought, I just wanted to make
No,
sure.
I apologize,
Okay.
it's my oversight. We'll make that change. Next slide, please. Part of the 25-26 budget includes a $100,000 appropriation in capital outlay. Over the past several budget cycles, operations and maintenance has been outfitting various buildings with door contact systems. These provide an additional security and hardening measure, so folks from the outside cannot get into any door. That doors are not kept ajar. If a door is kept ajar, it does send a notification to the building to advise that door 7 on the east wing has been left ajar. That notification is sent, and then the door is promptly closed. For 25-26, the first elementary school that is being considered is Hammergirl Elementary, particularly because of the number of doors in that particular building. We anticipate it'll be roughly $100,000 for that cost. We will plan over the next subsequent years additional door contacting systems for all of the other remaining elementary schools. Hammergirl and Glenmont are the ones with the most doors, just given they have similar layouts in terms of building design and construction. The other elementary schools, we may be able to combine those elementary schools in other years under one capital. Well, we can't do that per se, but we will address all of the elementary schools in capital outlay. Next slide, please. On to ballot propositions. The Board of Education will be considering 3 ballot propositions. The first one tonight is the bus proposition, which calls for the acquisition of 3 large diesel buses and 3 gasoline powered buses, not to an exceed amount of $814,770. That is the total purchase price of the buses based on the most recently confirmed quote from our bus manufacturer. I do anticipate that state aid will reimburse those buses at roughly a 66% reimbursement rate over the course of 5 years. On the capital reserve, this is what I had alluded to earlier for the creation of a 2025 capital reserve not to exceed $30 million with a term life of 10 years. Again, this is just the establishment and creation of a capital reserve that the district will be able to fund. Any money that is actually deposited into the reserve by board action cannot be pulled out of that capital reserve absent voter approval. Overall, on the ballot itself, what folks will see on May 20th are a number of ballot propositions. First and foremost, the district operating budget, which the board will review, consider later on this evening. The bus proposition, 2025 capital reserve, the Bethlehem Public Library operating budget, which has been adopted by the Library Board of Trustees, 2 District Board of Education seats, and 2 Library Board of Trustee seats. On May 20th, specifically for the For the school district, there are 2 open board seats currently occupied by Robert Tejan and John Walston for a 3-year term expiring June 30th, 2028. Nominating petitions were made available on February 20th and are due to the district clerk, Brittany Barrett, no later than April 21st at 5:00 p.m. Each nominating petition must have at least a minimum of 61 signatures of residents within the school district. Our calendar is quickly coming to a close. We have 3 scheduled meetings left in terms of the budget process. May 7th is the public hearing on the proposed budget. May 14th is a Meet the Candidates Night. And May 20th, from 7 to 9 p.m. is our annual district vote, which will be held in the high school Gym A. That's the presentation.
Thank you, John. And I just want to start by thanking you and your team and district leadership for all the hard work that you guys have put into putting this budget together. I know it's not easy, and especially this year when there have been a lot of things that we haven't known and have had to kind of be flexible and work around. I just wanted to let you know that
Thank you very
we
much.
appreciate that. Do people have questions? Saad?
I'll echo that, thanks, and also to all the school personnel and the department heads who I know came in here and did their best in a challenging time to really maximize the budget and to keep the tax impact, as low as possible. I wanted to ask a question about the undesignated fund balance, the point, the 700,000. How does that get refilled?
Every budget that we present as adopted is balanced, meaning expenditures meet revenue based on a number of anticipated needs, for example, instructional needs. Over the course of the year, dollars do not necessarily get expended in certain lines. Other lines are expended more than we anticipated. Same thing with, for example, our full-time equivalents. There may be vacancies, someone leaves in the middle of the year. At the end of our closeout process, we look at what was originally budgeted, both on expenditures and revenue, and where did we fall with regard to both those categories? Were we over on expenditures? Were we under? Were we under or over on revenue? When all that shakes out, any surplus funding at the end of the closeout period, the business office presents to the board options. We may increase reserves to the extent that reserves can be increased in accordance with applicable either board policy or state rule and regulation. Anything else usually falls to fund balance, which is where you get to that $4.6 million figure.
Right, and that's a statutory maximum of...
Under real property tax law, yes.
Okay. So, in previous years, have there been years where that was maxed out and we weren't able to put anything more into that?
Into the fund balance, to be in compliance with statutory law, yes. Now, I will say that there are districts throughout the state of New York that exceed that 4% threshold. It's frowned upon by the state comptroller's office, but there may be reasonable circumstances to do that. For example, you know that you have a one-time big expense, not in the current year, but in the future year, and you want to plan for that. I think where things get a little bit uncomfortable from an auditing perspective, if you're seeing 12, 15% fund balance dollars year over year without a designated purpose, there's a rational thought to be like, well, you should be giving some of those dollars back to taxing entities. A 4% threshold, though, I will say, at $4.6 million on a $117 million budget is not a lot of flexibility. I have 1 or 2 things that catch a cold over the course of the fiscal year. It's good to have, but it really doesn't provide for a large unforeseen expense or multiple years where you have a structural imbalance.
And then, so to a certain extent, to the extent that the board tonight votes about the capital reserve fund, that is also a bucket that revenue, the excess revenue can go into. To a certain extent, they're competing for those dollars.
That's correct. The one distinction, though, is once dollars go into a capital reserve, in order to get them out, it has to be for a designated capital purpose, which the voters have to approve.
Right.
And usually part of that proposition is, voters, do you approve using X amount of dollars out of this capital reserve to offset those costs?
And the undesignated fund is more of a rainy day fund?
Yes.
And proposing that we.
That's
tap
correct.
into.
Now, I will highlight the $715,000 for the 25-26 budget. A large portion of that, you may recall earlier in the year, the PSEG pilot had roughly a $611,000 additional pilot payment that not only PSEG was unaware of, but the district was unaware of as well, because it had reached certain production capacities that it had not met over the course of the other 19 or so years of the pilot agreement. So that was unanticipated revenue that the district received in 24-25. I'm suggesting taking all of that and really using it to offset the shortfall in funding for 25-26.
But that's a one-time occurrence.
It is a one-time occurrence, unless PSEG is off to the races and we get that again, but I can't forecast that, and I'm not sure PSEG can forecast that at this point either.
And I know you mentioned this, and then I'll be done. In terms of the state aid, I think it's 34 million. We're getting, do you have any projection, do you have any sort of forecasting in terms of how much you think is going to be available going forward, or you're not able to speak?
I can, with the caveat all else being equal, right? And the concern that I have from my position, and, you know, it's not that my glass is half full or half empty, I'm always waiting for someone to knock it over, but the concern I have is what the federal impact will be to, not so much the district. Again, to go back to a few meetings ago, the district gets roughly $2.7 million in federal funding.
But we don't know how the state.
I don't know how the state is leveraging its federal funding at the state conglomerate level that may negatively impact state aid calculations, not only for 25-26, but more so moving forward.
Thank you.
Catherine?
Yeah, a couple, so if you want to interrupt me at any time, please do. So I also want to extend my thanks to you and your team, to the district leadership, to all the department heads, for putting this together this year in uncertain circumstances. Budgeting is always, you know, there's an art and a science to it. However, this year's art is particularly chaotic with the unknown impacts of federal funding decisions and how that could impact the district and how it is impacting the district already. Given the fact that we're already losing 35,000 this year
And the food service
And
side,
food service side.
it's closer to about 135.
excuse me, 135,000 in food service this year. And the uncertainty around the EV grants that we had a commitment letter.
That's correct.
Yeah. So we're already seeing the impacts of chaotic budgeting at the federal level, and it seems like that could continue. So really grateful for your careful consideration, and I also just want to, as others have here, recognize that there are impacts of making reductions like this to our staff. You know, I'm grateful that we're not making any drastic changes or proposing any drastic changes, but even when we're making reductions, that has impacts on staffs and programs, and so I just want to extend my gratitude to everybody who's helping to make sure that we're on a steady path here. So one question that I've got as we try to navigate chaotic budgeting is that at the state level, there's already speculation and discussion about, well, the state is looking to adopt a budget soon. And if there is big federal fallout, there's conversation around the potential need to come back and revisit potentially budget things. Do we have that same opportunity within a business year with our budget? Is there opportunity for revisiting if there are any major shifts in any big way, or how do we address that here?
So one of my roles and responsibilities is to the best way practical, provide the board and the public sort of snapshots and status. Some of that's built into the usual month-to-month board agendas in terms of reporting and transaction detail, but it may require a little bit more in terms of, you know, some brief presentations if the agenda accommodates, to say, hey, this is where we thought we would be, this is where we're at, or there's new information that's come to light either at the federal, state, or local level that impacts the budget either programmatically or financially that I would relay. I would come with recommendations and options for the board to consider to address those in a timely manner, if they can truly be addressed. There may be an issue that the size and scope is a little bit large, that there may not be an immediate resolution or solution to. So I anticipate over the course of the 25-26 fiscal years, having a little bit more presentation or dialogue with the board members and the public in terms of where we stand, so we can address those challenges, not only for 25-26, but start planning for how do they translate into the 26-27 budget process, and what additional steps we may need to make. And one thing I do want to note is, when we're talking about the reduction in positions for 25-26, I mentioned 17 and a half FTEs. Those were all vacant positions.
Yes.
I just want to, for clarity
Please.
purpose,
Yeah, that makes sense.
that those were additional positions that, because of operational needs or limits and/or instructional enrollment issues, though the district could accommodate that without negatively impacting those areas.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as somebody, who really feels like one of the best things we can do as a governing body is provide some predictability and some understanding for taxpayers and district employees and programs of like how things are going. Again, I just want to, I'm grateful for all the steps that you take to provide that predictability, including the updates you're talking about, so thank you. Is there any update from the feds on the electric school bus commitments, or have we heard anything further? Sorry, just to shift gears entirely,
No, that's fine.
sorry.
I had a conversation with our bus provider on Friday of last week,
Okay.
looking to see has there been any additional discussions, movement. Our bus provider has been in contact with not only their EPA contacts, but with their lobbying firm and other bus providers, being like, hey, there's a distinction between, in their minds, and frankly my mind as well, those grant applications that were applied for and awarded, for which entities have an award letter, versus applications that are in process or new pots of grant money that may have recently become available. So I think what they're trying to focus on the most tangible argument and benefit, not only for the bus manufacturer, but for those entities that have committed to buses, is, hey, what about the funding that we already have an award letter for? So, but they haven't, they understand that their arguments have been made and received, but I have not received any additional information in terms of the status of those awards.
Cool, thank you for that update. One of the questions that occurred to me this evening as we're talking about pre-K is that I remember from a couple, when the district was doing the push for the kindergarten registration, and it seemed as though there was we weren't getting what we expected in registrations for kindergarten.
We still haven't.
Still
There's still a
haven't.
lot of outstanding that are on our projection list that we don't have enrolled. There's
Okay.
still a decent number.
Some of this funding, as I understand it, would be per pupil allocation.
That's all the
All of it
UPK is per pupil.
UPK is, yes, but also, beyond UPK, for district funding. Do we have do we have funding that is state-based, that is per pupil allocation, or is that part of the consideration? And if we are not seeing the kindergarten registrations that we anticipated,
Sure.
what impacts would that bring?
Well, if
with
your
it?
enrollment declines, and your state aid obviously is going to decline with that, but that's been true. We've been losing enrollment for a number of years now, so
Yeah.
that would be true for the K registration if it doesn't, if all of the projected numbers don't come to fruition, and that's our enrollment, and that's what we report on Veds Day in October,
Right.
for state aid purposes.
Right. But we still carry all the other expenses that come with operating a district.
Correct.
Right, okay. Sorry, that just occurred to me, so I wanted to ask about that. Yeah, I think that those are my questions. One last little one. The transfers line that you were talking about, what does that represent?
So you'll see a significant increase from the baseline budget to what we're ultimately considering tonight. Usually it's roughly a $400,000 transfer line between the capital outlay and to our special education and food service lines. There's roughly a $1.1 million transfer line, and that's associated with 2 additional additions that came over the course of the past several meetings. First one is $475,000 for the capital reserve associated with the additional building aid that we received on the 21 capital project that we anticipated we were going to get most of that, but I was conservative in terms of my estimate. All our documents have been submitted and accepted. I have an award letter, for lack of a better term, from state ed saying this is your building aid on that project. So that $475,000 was not included in my original estimate, revised estimate, putting that directly, since that 475 was tied to the capital reserve dollars we used in the first instance. I'm just simply moving that back so we have funding available for the next capital project. The other large component was, given some of the changes in food service, as we alluded to earlier, we roughly had a $40,000 transfer anticipated for the food service fund, given the anticipated not only cost increases in the food service fund, but the loss of the aid that we know about that required an additional $200,000 subsidy from the general fund. So you'll see that reflected, and that's why that transfer number is so large.
Thank you.
Comparatively.
Got it. Thank you so much. And again, I'm very proud of this district generally, but I'm also just very proud that, as you pointed out, over the years, we haven't, taxed beyond what we've needed. Judy before you, and the district leadership team has always really made an effort to make sure that we are being prudent and incredibly responsible with taxpayer dollars, and I'm very proud of that as well, so thank you.
Couple. The first one really builds off Bob's point. I appreciate the rationale for creating a further capital reserve fund. The budget is presented. There's not going to be anything to go into it for the next 4 or 5 years. Is that reasonable?
Yes, based on the budget as it is presented, assuming those dollars are spent
Sure.
and all the revenue is received. So the flexibility I have in the existing capital reserve is somewhat limited. After you take into consideration the closeout of the 21 capital project with the middle school auditorium, going to need roughly about $700,000 or $800,000 of the $1.7 million flexibility I have. 24-25 is looking to be a positive year, given the pilot. I got to put the fund balance in only to take it out, right? So that gets calculated in. We do have some vacancies. Interest and earnings are coming in higher than were budgeted. State aid is coming in higher than was originally budgeted. So there is some flexibility there. That being said, for 25-26, it remains to be seen. How many people, enrollment may change. We may not need to fill vacancies as needed. There may be some mid-year departures. There could be a number of things that happen. So I do think it's prudent for the board to have that option available. If there's no funding to put in it, that's fine. It's available should funding present itself. There's no requirement for the board to put money in. It just provides some flexibility for the board in future years.
No, I totally get that. I just don't want to give the impression that we expect $30 million of surpluses to appear.
No, that's...
I'll come back to that point in a second. Debt payments, ongoing debt.
That's correct.
Why not?
Because as over the largest, the most recent fiscal year in closeout 23-24 into 24-25, we just we issued not only bands for our 21 capital project, but bonds and for buses and the capital project in the same instance. As part of our strategic approach to minimize the loss of the PSEG or the anticipated PSEG pilot in 25-26. Bands are a one-time once, so that's why you see it was roughly $10.2 million going down to $9.2 million for 25-26. The rest of the debt service is scheduled for the debt issuances that we have on the books over the course and life of those payments. So they're really structured similarly to a mortgage in terms of the payment, The distribution of the principal and interest on those are
Very
somewhat
close, yeah.
different, but the total is roughly the same. The positive clip for the district in terms of debt service is around 2930, where we have several issuances that have reached their maturity and would decrease debt services moving forward absent another issuance.
That was my next question, thanks. Last thing then, really, so you've been really clear, which I absolutely appreciate. You're proposing currently a budget that starts taking from our piggy bank, right? And that piggy bank can cover maybe 3 years of this, but
Yes.
certainly no more, and probably we get a little sketchy about that time. At the same time, you're proposing a tax levy increase of 1.12%. That's well under inflation. Now, I understand that asking for a higher increase requires a 60% vote, but basically that's what I'm going to suggest, right? If we budgeted to cover the estimated expenditures, and I appreciate, again, that's been really tightly cut. It's a very small budget cut. You'd end up with a tax levy increase right around 2%. That, to me, seems like a more prudent thing to do, right? If you don't fund fully this year, not only are you taking out that piggy bank, but you're setting us up next year for that gap to be bigger, so that any percent tax levy increase would have a smaller effect, because your baseline is smaller. Your undesignated fund balance you're allowed to have is smaller, because your baseline is smaller. So there are compounding effects of trying to take out savings from a non-renewable income stream. So I'm going to ask the board to consider that we actually change this budget proposal slightly and simply say, look, let's cover what the district has said we think we need to spend, and ask the voters to cover that expenditure. Thanks.
John, is that something that you all contemplated? I thought I recall some discussion of what a proposal would be and what would be the best proposal for the board to consider. And so I wonder if someone could remind us of that conversation.
I wasn't clear last meeting, so it's
No,
conceivable I missed something. Yeah.
that's totally, no, it would be a good level-setting reminder, I think, one way or the other.
So from my position, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. I'm using the tax cap formula the number is the number based on the ins and outs, that there's really not a way to juice up the 1.1% on this year's tax
Yeah.
cap. So that's what I worked towards. And to do that, we discussed internally with district leadership team, these are the vacant positions that, based on current enrollment and class sizes and instructional programmatic interest, these are what we think we can do without in terms of the vacancies that are available. I did go through line by line to the best extent possible, decreasing other appropriation authorities where I could meet, not only to meet the tax cap, but also the inflationary pressures I'm feeling elsewhere in the budget, hospital and medical insurance, the salary increases. So there's a lot of moving parts, levers, and gears here. If the board would like or is considering a tax levy increase greater than the 1.1%, that is certainly within the board's discretion to do. I have areas where I would maybe bolster because of things that may have, again, been maybe maximized a little bit too high in terms of revenue based on the information I have today, or conversely on the expenditure side. Again, a 1% increase gets you roughly $730,000, $740,000 in additional flexibility that would eliminate the need for fund balance, at least for 25, 26.
I think also, just to add to that, when we realized we were getting the additional money from the PSEG pilot, that's 600 and some thousand more than what we anticipated, which is what, to do 100,000 more really over 1.1 didn't make sense for 60%, but that's really part of the reason why we went with the 1.1, because we had that additional revenue that was unanticipated.
Keep in mind, this is also part in timing. Our budget process started in November, right? So we've been really having discussions, actually even go back further, because we knew what pressures we were experiencing, right? A lot of this is a known you know where your pain and pinch points are. You may not necessarily know how painful they are, but you knew the categories that were coming. So we've been having ongoing conversations in terms of we have flexibility here, not so much flexibility there. What steps can we take not only for 24, 25, but into the 25, 26 budget process to get us where we need to be? At the time, we were anticipating a much larger tax levy increase because of the loss of the pilot. You may recall we were looking at 5.7, 5.9%, knowing that amount was a non-starter, not only for the district, but for voters in general. We started pushing as hard as we could, not only on revenue estimates, but on expenditure decreases to get us somewhere reasonable, to your point, your 2, maybe 2.5% increase. February 26th, there was an official notification that, hey, a new pilot agreement is in place, or at least a one-year extension while a new pilot agreement is negotiated, which swung the calculation from our 5.7%, where we were working for 2 to 3, all the way to 1. It didn't necessarily change the tax levy need as much as it did just the calculation. So the gap between that 1% or 2, 2.5%, we worked towards using fund balance to the superintendent's point, because we did have that one-time, one-source funding.
And that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out, managing the future years. If we go at making numbers up entirely, if we go at 2% this year and 3% next year, it feels, I think, more consistent and less of a hard sell than going 1% this year and 6% next year, right? Even though you actually end up in the same place.
That's right. You may not necessarily be able to go to 6% absent an override anyway, just the way the arithmetic works in the formula. Absent the PSEG, you could because of the loss of the pilot, right? It does provide that flexibility because pilot payments are treated tax-like dollars.
The formula changes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the board could have had, if the pilot wasn't in place, you could have proposed a 5.7% increase in the tax levy. Not necessarily that you would, but you could have, and still only required the 50% plus 1 authorization and to be in compliance.
So, just to make sure I'm sort of following what you were saying about the $613,000, it was unanticipated.
Correct.
So that funding was unanticipated, it's coming in. It essentially would go into the fund balance to come back out.
Right, that's how
So
that has to fund that.
so then we just have that,
Correct.
there's just that $100,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Just wanted
And
to make
to
sure that
the
was-
superintendent's point, that's where you're looking at fractions of a percentage, because we had made that strategic decision, hey, this money's in, let's use it to minimize, the impact to taxpayers. Then you're looking at a 0.25% of an override, which
You probably wouldn't propose a budget with a 1.13%.
right.
tax,
So that was part of it. So it's hard to sort of summarize, the longitudinal basis of these conversations that we've been having since November. There's ins, there's outs, there's changes. Things upset the apple cart that you never saw coming. So I know we're at today, but there was a long path to get there with certain decision points made.
You and I completely understand where you're coming from. I think those are very valid points. And I would just say that I'm comfortable with the budget that's been presented in front of us today. But just in terms of budgeting for next year and the year after, I think that because we are concerned about, dipping into the fund balance and the fact that we can't continuously do this, that we may anticipate going over, depending on what the tax cap is next year. I know the formula is different every year. But we may end up being in that situation where we are asking for a 60% override of that tax cap. And just to keep us in the loop next year at the beginning of the budget process, know that we are open to that possibility. Obviously, no one wants to do that, but none of us feel comfortable continuously going into this fund balance, knowing we probably only can do it for 3 years. So I'm very comfortable with this budget. I really do appreciate the work that you've taken to get us to this point. I know it was very hard. Just going forward next year, know that we, are open to that possibility if we do have to go over the tax cap. just kind of keep us informed on that process as we go.
Happy to do so.
Laura, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, just one question, John. Looking at the state aid estimate slide, the column all the way to the right is labeled 2025-26 executive proposal. Does that mean that those figures were included in the governor's budget
correct.
proposal for the state? And as we all know, we do not have a state budget in place yet, as far as I know, unless something changed in the
What
past few hours. But are those figures linked to formulaic calculations
Yes.
that are not necessarily impacted by the passage of a state budget?
Yes and no. So we'll take foundation aid as an example. The state aid runs are based on changes or the database that all districts input data into at certain points in the year. For example, the executive budget is based on the November 15th database. Over the course of the budget process, districts are updating data or changing data based on either their closeouts or, oh, I forgot to claim this, I overclaimed this, and they're making adjustments. So the numbers that I have presented are the most up-to-date numbers. There may have been a state run relatively recently because of the April 1st deadline, but too late to really maneuver, because I don't anticipate huge swings. They're usually $15,000 here, increase, decrease, it all pretty much rounds out, unless you really made a mistake or forgot to claim something where you could see some swings. I will say that the information I have seen from the one House bills on both the Assembly and the Senate have mirrored the governor's budget pretty much. The only main difference I've seen is the governor's budget assumed a 2% hold harmless clause, meaning that for your foundation aid, you were at least guaranteed a minimum of a 2% increase, which is the $385,000 for Bethlehem that I talked about earlier this evening. I forget if it was the Assembly or the Senate, they had changed that to 3%. Again, not a significant change, but most of what I have seen from the one House bills are sort of in step with the governor's budget, not only on state aid, but as well as the provision of state funding for free and reduced meals for local school districts. There were some minor technical changes between the one House bills, but overall those have been, from what I last saw from our member organizations, lockstep with the governor.
That at least is a source of comfort, right?
Yes.
Other thoughts on Ewan's proposal, the budget in general? John?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm comfortable with what you proposed here. I mean, I think I'd rather not make a habit of every year trying to say we're going to go above, we're going to go above when right now there's that additional funding. It's a gentle amount to take out of that balance. And next year, if the economic climate is different and there's more significant situation, then present that and then put that out to the town. But I feel like for now, you've done a great job. It's very solid. And we've got, again, this additional funding coming in, so we're not taking a ton from that.
For informational purposes, school districts are held to a different application of the formula than your towns and municipalities. If there is leftover dollars that you do not use, they're gone from the school district side. On the municipal side, districts can keep up to 1.5% of any, it's called a carryover from one year to the next. So for the folks at home that may be somewhat familiar, I just want to make that distinction that, you know, we showed a slide earlier in terms of the taxing authority that was not levied. If you were a town or village or even a fire district, you could actually take some of those dollars and roll it over along with the year-to-year increase and still be in compliance with the tax cap. Again, I'm not suggesting that we didn't need it at the time. The unfortunate angle from or position from the school district is that we do need it somewhat now, but those it close those doors moving forward.
I'm also comfortable moving forward here. I do want to note, though, I think Ewan raises a really good point. I mean, if we, by moving forward with this budget and with the 1.1%, to a certain extent, barring other larger unforeseen changes, we're putting ourselves on a path to a reduced budget next year as well, right? We're starting from a smaller pot. So to your point, Meredith, of like, yes, let's definitely talk about, exceeding the cap if need be when we get there. You know, just to underline Ewan's point, if we want to maintain or grow because of the fact that salaries go up, because of the fact that healthcare costs go up and everything else, you know, if we want growth, we're looking at a much bigger jump above the cap. And again, one of the things that I've learned over the past several months is how much I value boring government that predictably lays out budgets. And so there is that's a choice we're making there as well.
I would agree that I'm comfortable with the budget as it's been proposed. I think particularly since that a good chunk of that $715,000 is essentially the $613,000 that we were not expecting coming in. And I do think, you know, we are, as I think several of us have mentioned, we are in some uncertain times right now in terms of, you know, where things are going financially. And I think this giving us a year and giving us some breathing room to sort out where we are is not a bad idea.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we could consider too, John, your offer about whether it's monthly, quarterly, you know, I don't know if we certainly don't have to do this tonight, but want to set a request for updates, or if we want to consider that in a coming meeting or that sort of thing, and, you know, some input on what a reasonable update schedule might look like would be helpful for that, but just so that we are seeing yellow flags before they become red flags, and so that when we start this process, that you actually start months earlier next year, you know, we're coming into it eyes open.
I hear the sense of the room. I'll just comment, you know, the financial uncertainty and turbulence isn't going to be less a year from now. And the breathing room comment, right, by starting to withdraw from that piggyback, money is fungible. Sure, the 600 grand coming in, that could put you in a better spot for next year, or you can spend it now.
I'm sorry.
By spending it now, you actually give yourself less breathing room next year, because you haven't got that extra cushion if you're leaving it, that's all.
I agree.
What would that money have come in? Would that have gone over the 4%?
It's fungible.
Well, don't this question. I would do my best to use the
Just
other
somewhere else.
reserves
Yeah.
to maintain the fund balance, but I will tell you, given what I'm seeing for the out years, and this is an internal conversation for district leadership and ultimately for board consideration, the 4%, while it's statutorily required, it may not be a feasible option for the board. We may have to consider, in order to weather the storm, not only do we need the 4%, we need some extra to make sure that we can balance budgets moving forward, but also have enough for the unforeseens as well.
But there's got to be something to fund that. I mean, there's got
You
to
know,
be
understood,
surplus.
right. I guess when I get to close out for 24, 25, if I have, you know, if we have $4 million now and I have another $3 million in surplus, like, where does the board want to see that allocated?
And what's the, okay, well, here's the, what's the penalty, what's the downside of putting up above 4%? You get,
Someone told you.
I get called to SEG jail, so,
Okay.
no, please visit
I'm willing to
me.
look into
It's usually an audit finding by our auditors because it is statutorily required. But again, I'm telling you that there's more districts than not that do not adhere to the 4% threshold. I try to
Thank
follow
you.
the law, but, you know, there may be operational circumstances and logistics and that warrant for future planning, right? It'd be hard for us to say, well, Now we have to tax, 3 years from now, tax you at 10% because we honored this 4%, arguably artificial threshold of real property tax law. Like, that's a hard narrative to make. So, to the extent that the board, I will, again, a lot of the funding that's available at year end is based on the management of the budget as soon as it's adopted. So if there's funding available, I will present, hey, here's where you can put it. There's certain reserves that, we may be capped at. There's certain ones that, again, you need to be careful. You put it in, you can't get it out. So.
Right, but I mean, that all assumes reserves.
It does, yep, it does.
Fair enough, thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Next on the agenda is our recognition of public comment on an agenda item. If we have any visitors who would like to address the board on an agenda item, now would be the time to come to the microphone. Item 6, action items. A, finance action items. It is recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 and 2.
So moved.
Seconded.
Discussion?
Yeah, just thanks, right? Most of this
Yeah.
money is people giving us thousands of dollars to give scholarships.
Yeah.
We shouldn't, I'm going to read them out, right? Michael Big Dog Medevsky, Donald Robillard, Robert Salamone, and James Coach Connolly, all given $1,000 to fund a scholarship. So thank you, guys.
All in favor?
Thanks.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. B, professional personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 3.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. C, support personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. D, other action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1 and 2.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion?
Yeah. One of these policies is student members of the board.
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to having a student member of the board. There's language in there, they don't go to executive session or vote. Is that our policy or is that state policy?
That's under state law.
Okay, thanks.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. E, the 2025-2026 budget adoption and propositions. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1 through 4.
So I never do this right. When do I formally move to modify our current budget?
Or modify the proposal?
To modify one of the action
The tax levy
items.
amounts, yeah.
Is
So-
there which one are you talking about?
So it's the school budget, right?
So number 3?
Yeah.
Okay, so the best thing to do would be to move.
To separate those out?
Order to
Sure.
separate out number 3.
Please do that.
It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1, 2, and 4.
So,
So moved.
second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. Then it is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action item number 3.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to move to modify that to increase the tax levy to fully meet the planned expenditures, which if my math is right, John can do the exact math, is a tax levy of about 2%, but basically cover the current funding gap that will be met by taking money from reserves.
So we have a motion to amend on the table. Do we have a second?
Guess not. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the motion to amend will not move
Okay, I'll
forward.
one for a second. Yep.
So then we have our motion to adopt item number 3. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Any abstentions? That carries. F, notice of 2025 annual election. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action item. Number 1, regarding the 2025 notice of annual election.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. Item 7, recognition of public comment on a non-agenda item. If we have any visitors who would like to address the board on a non-agenda item, now would be the time to come to the microphone. Item 8, future meetings and events. Our next regularly scheduled board meeting is on Wednesday, April 23rd. Note that that is 1 week later than it normally would be because of the spring break week. And that is going to be at Eagle Elementary School, anticipating executive session at 6 and reconvening to open session at 7 o'clock. And our meeting following that is on Wednesday, May 7th, and that would be back here at the high school. Again, anticipating executive session at 6 and reconvening to open session at 7. Brittany, if I could just ask if you could send us a reminder before our next meeting so that we all remember to go to Eagle Elementary School. Seeing no need to go back into executive session, could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. And our visiting Pig and Supa students, don't forget please to come up and sign out.
Your look certainly was.